I have told you of King Lludd, king of all Britain, and I have told you how in his reign the island of Britain was troubled by 3 great plagues. I have told you of how King Lludd overcame the first plague, the Coraniaid, who twisted all words so that everyone fell to ill will and dissension. I have told you how he took on the second great plague, the scream that was heard every May Eve and made the strong sick and brought all to suffering. But now let me tell you of the third great plague, and how it made King Lludd's claim to be the protector and the provider for his people seem nothing but a lie. For that was how it was in those dim, distant, far-off times. The ruler of the realm need not just be a leader, but must protect their people and must provide for all the folk of their realm. And this was done at the feasts in the king's great hall in his capital of London, where in the hall there was a storeroom, and the storeroom was protected by great stout doors and a big strong lock, but within the storeroom, well, there was kept bounty from the efforts, from the work of all the folk of the land. The crops that they had raised, the harvests that they had brought in, the livestock who they had raised for slaughter were there ready to be eaten. Fish from the streams from off the shore, fruits from the trees and from the bushes, and great flagons, great casks, great jars of wine, of ale, of juice, of sweet, sweet milk and honey, all stored by the king, but not for the king, for the good of the people. So that when the king opened the doors of the hall for a feast and invited all of his loyal followers in, then he would bestow this bounty, give out gifts of all the good things that the people of the realm had worked so hard to produce, and all folk of the realm could benefit from this bounty. Even the poorest, even the lowliest, even the most hungry could come to the king and know that their belly and the bellies of their family would be filled. But in the time of the 3 great plagues, and not only did the Coraniaid take your words on the wind and turn them into twisted lies, not only was that scream heard above the hearth of every land that made the strong sick and brought all to sorrow, but when the people of the land were at their greatest need, then whenever the lock was unlocked and the doors were thrown open to the storeroom, no matter how hard all had worked to stock it with the fruits of their labours, every day, every morning, it was completely empty, bare as a barren mountainside, not even a grain for a mouse to steal away with. And it had been full just the night before. They worked so hard every day to restock the storeroom for the goodness of the realm. And yet every morning it was empty, and none could ever tell how anybody had got there, got in past the guards, through the hall, had unlocked the heavy, heavy lock and had opened the doors and somehow taken everything away in just one night. And the people of the realm, well, they looked to Lludd. They looked to their king to save them from this plague. Cleve, well, just as he had done with the first plague, the Coraniaid, just as he had done with the second, the scream, he asked the advice of his brother, Llefelys, who lived way across the sea in the kingdom of Gaul. And so on that day, when they had met in the middle, in what is now the English Channel, upon their two boats, and Llefelys had thought long and hard, and told Cleve of the potion that would disperse the Coraniaid, of where to dig in the earth of his realm to find the two dragons that fought at the heart of the kingdom, just as he had helped those other 2 times. Llefelys thought hard and told Cleve what he must do to solve this third plague, the empty store. For Llefelys discerned that the one who was stealing away all the goods of the people of the realm, this was a giant who was well versed in all the mysterious ways of magic. This giant walked through the streets of London in broad daylight without ever being seen, because with his magic arts he'd wrapped himself in a cloak of invisibility, so none knew he was there, and silently he stepped street to street, corner to corner, house to house. None could see the movement of his hand, none could see the wiliness of his mind. None knew how he stole from all the folk there all about him, from right under their noses. This giant, every night, would make his way through the city of London to the King's Hall, and with his magic arts he cast a spell so that all within the hall would be lulled to sleep, so that not even the most dutiful guards, not even the most dedicated of the king's servants, not even the most sharp-witted courtiers even noticed that this giant slipped in from the city and on silent feet made his way through the hall, still wrapped in his invisible cloak. And with his magic arts he lifted the lock on the doors, swung them silently aside, and gathered all the goods there into a sack of such infinite capacity, of such endless hunger. It seemed that this sack would never ever be full. Nothing would ever be enough, but having taken all that there was, the giant would then slip back out into the night and strut the city streets once more. And Cleve asked his brother what means there were to defeat such a powerful being. And Llefelys said that this time there was no potion, and there was no secret spot to dig. No, this time the only one, the only person who could take charge and defend the needs of the people was their king, was Cleve himself. He must wait in the shadows of his own hall, hiding in the darkness at night, with but his own trusty sword with him, cold iron resting across his knees as he sat. But beside him he must have a vat of the coldest, the crispest, icy water, so that whenever he felt his mind clouded and his eyes lulling to sleep, he must bring himself back to reality, sharply wake himself to see the truth of what was around him. And knowing that his brother could be trusted, and seeing how his brother's word had proved true on both the first two tasks, Llŷd steeled himself and made ready to face down the third. One dark night, he sat alone in the shadows of his hall, his sword steel resting across his knees, and beside him the vat of ice-cold water. And he waited, watching the moonlight through the window making its way across the walls. And then he found his head clouding and his mind turning to thoughts of rest, and his eyes drooping, and he could barely keep his eyes open, and he could see out the doors, out the windows, all of his warriors on guard, all of them nodding and snoring and snoozing away. And he thought, I can't let this happen to me. And he plunged his hands into the icy water. And even though his hands were stung by the cold, he flung the water in his face. And even though his face was stung, so cold was the water, and he must do it again and again, and his hands now were numb, and he felt his lips turning blue. He stayed awake. He stayed startled awake, and the shock of it kept his mind sharp. And then he saw from the shadows the door to his hall swing silently open. And then he saw in the moonlight through the windows, he saw a shadow cast against the wall, even though there seemed to be no figure there to cast that shape. And he knew that the giant was here, and he waited as the giant crossed the stones of the floor until the giant was just before him, till the giant he could see from the shadow was reaching out to grasp the lock on the storeroom door. And then he took up his sword and he leapt forward and he swung and he cut the giant so hard he heard the bellow. He felt the sword bite. And then he felt himself knocked aside as a great blow that he could not even see came crashing into the side of his face, and he rolled upon the floor, and he got to his feet and he looked around, and still he could see no one there assailing him, but he could see the shadows flickering in the moonlight. And he leapt forward, and with one eye upon the wall and another on the empty space before him, he fought as hard and as frenziedly as he could, and though he kept getting battered and beaten and he could not see where the blows were coming from, he felt that still his sword was biting deep. And eventually, after what felt like an eternity, though his heart pounded and he felt the blood in his temples and he felt the bruises on his bones, then he swung once more, and the sword bit so deep, somewhere so soft, that he heard the giant cry out, and he saw the cloak of invisibility thrown to the floor, and bloodied and beaten, his foe fell before him to his knees. So tall was he that his eyes were now just level with Llŷd's. And the giant begged him for forgiveness, for mercy, to let him go and recover from his wounds so that he could be fit and well and a true, upstanding, honest citizen of the kingdom from this point on. But Llŷth held the sword out before him, and he said, "No, no, you dare ask for mercy when all of those people outside these walls still suffer from the thefts that you have committed. No, there will only be mercy if you give back everything you stole." And the giant said, "Oh, really? I mean, it's so hard to find it all now, and I honestly, look, let's just let bygones be bygones." But Llŷth said, "No, no. For the good of the people of the realm, you owe them back." And feeling the weight of the sword resting on his bared neck, the giant said, yes, okay, I'll do it. And he brought from behind his back the sack which he had carried for the theft he had planned for that very night. And he upended it, and it seemed like it would go on forever. All of the bread, all of the fruits, all of the flesh, all of the grain, all of the drinks, all there, untouched, unharmed, all ready for the people to feast. And having it all back, Llŷth kept the sack and the cloak of invisibility, and he kept an oath from the giant that never again would he raise his hand or use his wits against the well-being of the people of the land. And the giant was driven back out into the night. And that next day, when the golden rays of the sun came in through the windows and lit up the hall, then Llŷth invited all his people there into his hall, and he threw open the doors of his storeroom, and they saw stacked to the ceiling everything they needed for feasting for that day and the next day and all the days they could imagine to come. And there was not one person in the realm who needed to go hungry again. And so that was how Llŷth, king of all the island of Britain, with the aid of his brother Llefelys across the sea, overcame the 3 great plagues of the island of Britain. But rulers need always be watchful. And some plagues never quite go away. And some troubles have a terrible way of coming back around as the ages pass and as time passes on. And so, if you come back next week, I shall tell you of how the echo of these plagues was felt again in another age, much later than the time of Llŷth and Llefelys, and how another king found himself troubled by it, and of how he found help from the most unexpected